Thank you. Many people speak of lesbian erasure as if this is a new phenomenon. It isn't new. The forms of erasure being promoted under the trans banner are new manifestations of an old problem. The differences are the ways in which it was pursued and the stated political allegiance of those who seek to erase lesbians as a social and political and legal grouping from public and political life. Historically, the most vocal opponents of lesbian rights together have almost exclusively been on the political right. Opponents have always existed on the political left, but not to the public and vocal extent that we see today. The erasure of lesbians naturally follows the erasure of women as a distinct grouping under the law. We've already been erased from organisations that were set up to fight for basic civil rights that were denied to lesbians and gay men. Some of the first rights fought for by those organisations were the right to gather with one another in public and private without being harassed by the police or persecuted by representatives of the state. In fact, it was once illegal to serve alcohol to someone who is known to be a homosexual in this country. Recently, we have seen women in Britain wearing shirts saying that they are lesbians and defining what a lesbian is, being refused service, and being asked to leave a bar because a trans person found lesbians openly stating that they are lesbians offensive based on their beliefs. This is something that we have not seen legally supported in the Western world for the last 30 years, the denial of service based on lesbianism. And it's hard to imagine any other group, a religious or political group, being able to be in a bar and say, I don't like those people because they offend my beliefs. I don't like the fact that they're saying what a lesbian is. And being listened to and in fact having that enforced by members of the police. That you will not see that anywhere, not in Australia, not in the UK, not in the US. But because these people were trans and they found it offensive that lesbians were saying that they were lesbians and defining it, they were removed. Good laws are anchored by solid definitions that are universally accepted. If the law is subject to wide interpretation, the intent of the law itself can easily be perverted by those seeking to do harm to those who the law is meant to protect. If the name of the group is rendered meaningless, rights to freedom of association disappear. One of the purposes of the law is to provide protection from interference in the basic human rights and dignity of human beings. One of the basic premises of many human rights-based laws boils down to the right to be left alone. This is a very ancient concept in the law because in the history of lesbian people we have seen common threads linking together past threats to our community with current threats. The rhetoric that supported our oppression and marginalisation in the past is echoed by those supporting our erasure today. So we need to look at the history in order to properly understand where the threat to lesbians lies today. The struggle for these fundamental rights as it relates to lesbians is illustrated by struggles of lesbians to visit their partners in hospitals without being told by medical staff that they're not family of their partners. It relates to the right of lesbians to form relationships without being subjected to arbitrary arrest, conversion therapy in psychiatric wards, the right to leave our property to our partners, and to manage our financial affairs as we see fit. For the right for lesbians to be free from harassment in our workplaces. The right to gather together as an oppressed group with common interests, often referred to as freedom of association, without interference from governmental structures of power. If a woman is defined as anyone who feels like a woman, then the rights of lesbians so long fought for are effectively undermined, leading to possible destruction. In one fell swoop, just by change of definition of lesbian from person of the female sex exclusively attracted to other members of the female sex, to literally anyone who claims or identifies as a lesbian, lays the groundwork for men to harass and stalk lesbians whilst claiming to be a lesbian. it erases the right of lesbians to gather together in public space and to pursue our right to political speech. It effectively criminalises lesbians publicly gathering together to the exclusion of men. Freedom for lesbians to gather together is a historically very recent phenomenon. I have spoken to lesbians who within their lifetimes have been tortured under the banner of conversion therapy. It should be remembered that it was the most vulnerable of lesbians that was subjected to conversion therapy, especially the young and especially lesbians who had been sexually abused. Women who were bullied by their peers and convinced that they were really damaged heterosexuals who could women who were, bullied by the peers and convinced they were really damaged heterosexuals, they could change or transition to a heterosexual state. There are clear similarities to the tone of conversion therapy back then to gender transitioning now. And it was also framed as being woke and progressive at the time. Certainly therapists back then, the other thing that they did was they had offered lobotomies to gay men and lesbians as a cure for homosexuality. But this was new, woke and progressive to convert them to heterosexuality, or they said going back to a heterosexual state. So conversion therapy was seen as more humane. Homosexuality, lesbianism were no longer defects of character or evidence of sinfulness. They were at the time of the conversion therapy couched in pseudo-scientific language, there's echoes today, that spoke of overcoming mental illness and curing homosexuality. In fact, much of the psychiatric and psychology industry's literature erased lesbians by calling us damaged heterosexuals. The ability of psychologists to torture lesbians rested on legal structures that were enforced by the government and governmental structures of power. It was often framed as the right to seek psychiatric help. And there are clear links to saying to children they have the right to trans. And the classification of lesbianism as a mental illness by psychiatric bodies opened the door for the torture of lesbians to be pursued, accepted, funded, and indeed enforced by governmental bodies. And this is happening again, but they've just changed the label. I've spoken to women who, within my lifetime, had been deprived of their children due to the discovery of their lesbianism. The interference of the state to violate the private life, the public life of lesbians, and the use of governmental bodies to suppress the speech of lesbians and punish lesbians defending themselves from the interference of others. This is happening again. The fruits of the labour of lesbians, the rewards of lesbians' political struggle are threatened, if not erased, if the legal definition of lesbian as a distinct population of people is lost. Freedoms won within living memory can be lost. The most vulnerable of lesbians are once again marginalised, especially if they refuse to trans. If they don't perform their gender correctly, they can be told that they are not lesbians, they are really men. This time they don't have access to the legal assistance of the organisations their forebears worked for and set up for just such a purpose. Already there are groups of lesbians gathering together in private homes in order to socialise exclusively with each other. Women who could once take up public space in order to socialise are once again forced to retreat to private spaces as our lesbian forebears did. The hard-won resources are currently being diverted to support the trans activist goals. These are organisations that lesbians put in decades of work to set up are suddenly being taken over by the T in the LGBTIQ. With the effective erasure of lesbians as a group that exists from legal existence, there follows the cultural erasure of lesbians. So now, instead of in the old days where lesbians were called damaged heterosexuals, now, and being forced by the right to call ourselves, to become heterosexual, now by the left we are being forced to call ourselves pansexual or bisexual, though most often pansexual. This is what is happening at the moment, that it is not okay to be exclusionary, which lesbianism is an exclusionary sexuality. It isn't from the right, it is from the left. And we are painted as being bigots for exercising our control over our bodies and over who we date. We didn't expect, if you had said to me in the 90s that we would be fighting this battle again, but from the left, I would have dismissed you. But this is exactly what is happening, and this phenomenon of the cotton sealing was very much publicised by the late Magdalene Burns, and fortunately she put a lot of information out into the public for young lesbians and anyone interested in the erasure of lesbians, and we have her to thank for so much material to refer to describe what is actually happening. And this phenomenon is leaking into the legal system, and systems that are extensions of the legal system are acting as if the law has already been changed, and it has not. We need to fight so that the laws are not changed, so that lesbians are not erased and so that women are not erased. Thank you.